All right. Well, Andrea, I appreciate you coming in today. I'm very excited. A lot of times when I have, people come on and new guests, and, a lot of times it's people that I've gotten to, I know them, right? I've got to have some experience with them and got to meet them. And so I'm always excited when I get somebody in that's new and someone that, especially I love public speaking. I love, just really going through all the things that you've done and kind of crafting the brand message and, all of the stuff. And so, Andrea, I appreciate you coming in today. Can you give us a little insight about you?
Sure. Well, thank you, Michael. I really, really appreciate you having me on your show. So I've spent, most of my career in advertising. I started off many, many years ago. Actually, I started in the not-for-profit side as a fundraiser, but then moved into advertising, and started in doing direct marketing. Eventually, moved into brand strategy. Finished my career close to 10 years ago now, but after spending almost 25 years doing that. And now I have a company. I'm an entrepreneur. I have a company called Talk Boutique, and we have a sister company called the Thought Leader Academy. And we work with experts and change makers, and we help them to transform into thought leaders by helping them to become storytellers. And we do that so that they can create the impact that they want to make. And I do it personally because I believe that we all have a voice in helping to create and co-create a future that represents all of us. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I love that. Andrea, what got you, obviously I'm sure that the story goes way back, right, of kind of how you've evolved and where you're at today. But, I think when, public speaking, right, it's one of those things that I think everybody wants to do it. Everybody's scared to do it, or most
Yeah.
are scared to do it, right? It's, and especially as you become, an entrepreneur. And,
Mhm.
for me, I always kind of had this vision of wanting to speak on stages and, wanting to do these things. And I didn't get to do it for the longest time, right? Then I got into entrepreneurship and was still kind of figuring that out as well. I started taking some speaking classes myself. But, I think so many people don't realize how powerful and important it is to be crafting your public speaking skills, even if you don't plan on getting on a stage, just in
Mhm.
your ability to lead a team, just in your ability
Oh,
to speak
absolutely.
to your people. So how did you kind of get into the space?
Well, it was as a lot of my career has been a little bit of, by accident and by circumstance. Like I said, I had spent a lot of time in marketing and advertising. And, when I entered the business of advertising, coming out of the not-for-profit world, I had this dream that I could, move out of these, these organizations that had big hearts, but empty pockets. And I could move into a place that had really big pockets, but maybe not so much heart. And I thought I could bring the heart, And so I came into advertising, this sort of real idealist, wanting to make a difference with this incredibly powerful medium. And, my belief was that I could start to, in some way, impact that, those messages so that it was a little bit more representative of what the world looks like and less so consumer oriented. And of course, the reality is advertising is selling. And so, yes, I could make a little bit of impact, but, after 25 years, I sort of woke up one day and realized I was an idealist in a capitalist world, and I
Wow.
had to make some changes. And I had to look at, because I was not achieving the impact goals that I wanted to make. I remember it was the year that I was turning 50, and I was at a point in my life where my daughter was off to university, and I'm living, in a lovely home, but in the suburbs. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing with my life? Where from here, Because as I looked back, I had achieved everything I wanted to achieve, when I was 20 and making these big goals, or seemed like big goals. But at 50, you realize, well, I've done a lot already in those 30 years in between 20 and 50. And so I had to do something different. And so I just had this opportunity to start. I was still in advertising, but I just started going to conferences, and I started doing some volunteer work. And I found myself hired as a speaker's coach for TEDx Toronto. Now, at the time, I didn't even know what a speaker's coach was. It was brand new to me. But I also, my whole days were spent presenting, because at that point I was a senior vice president of strategy. My job was to present research and strategies and work with clients on a very deep level for their businesses. And I started working with as a speakers coach for TED, and again, this was in the early days of TEDx. And so, there weren't many out there. TEDx Toronto was actually one of the top brands at the time for the TED world because it was so new. And so I found myself working with these incredible individuals, people who were literally changing our world, scientists, academics, technologists, artists. These were people who were so busy doing the work, they were forgetting to tell anyone about it. And the reality was that I started working with them, and I remember being incredibly overwhelmed, thinking, what can I teach these people? I mean, I remember walking into a meeting with one of my very first speakers, and he had a PhD in engineering and a PhD in medicine. And he was working on the worldwide project to decode the genome. And I'm thinking, wow, little old me, I work in advertising, right? What am I going to help this guy with, And I think the thing that I learned was that the work that I had done in advertising, I was highly trained to be able to take very, very complex data and turn it into very simple ideas. In the ad world, we would do what was called find key consumer insights. They are the underpinnings of all ad campaigns. And that was what my job was. And so what I had to do was to take, consumer research and find why it is we make the buying decisions we make. Well, that was the exact skill that somebody with a dual PhDs decoding the genome needed to be able to take that incredibly complex work and turn it into a 15-minute TED Talk. And, it was a powerful realization for me. I didn't know I had this skill. I didn't understand the power of it or the transferability of it. And so I started working in the TED world and understanding what I could do, but also what was needed, because I eventually moved in. I was a speakers coach. I went on to become the director of curation, and eventually I chaired the event. And I went on years later to hold licenses and run my own TED events and also work with many other TED events. But in that time, I started to understand that, all of these people, the good work that they're doing in the world, if we don't know about it, you and I, the people who are actually going to be living the results of their work, the work they're doing not only doesn't get recognized or understood, but it also doesn't get funded or in some way picked up.
Yeah.
And so if we're never knowing about it and they're not able to communicate it, the whole world suffers.
Yeah.
And so I started to think, what if I created an organization, some form of support for individuals like that? Because, on TEDx Toronto, we would get over 1,000 applications every year for 10 spots on stage. And the people who made it to stage, they got some training and some expertise. But what about the 990 that didn't?
Yeah.
And it's not that they weren't ready for the TED stage. It's just for whatever reason, they didn't match our criteria. And they were all doing good work in the world. And the thing is, no one out there wants to talk about those people, because the reality is our media prefers to talk about the bad news, not the good news, right? Yeah. And so how do we help them? And so that was why I created Talk Boutique. And in that, it wasn't just to get on a public stage, although that's part of it, because being on a public stage gives you a platform. But what I did was I created a company where I could teach them how to communicate their complex ideas simply and powerfully, no matter where they are, whether they're on a public stage, whether they're in front of a boardroom, whether they're on a podcast, or whether they're just talking to somebody at a dinner party. Because the reality is we need them to, because their work is changing our future. And the reality is, not only do we need more of them, but we need a greater diversity of them. Because that was the other thing that came later that I started to see, was that, the more diverse that person identified as, the less we knew or understood their knowledge and contribution.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So many things in there. One is I've always wanted to do a TED Talk. That's been I have a friend that's done it as well, and he's kind of leaned into me to start going down that route a little bit. I haven't really I guess, put much intention or focus on it. But, in the future, that's definitely something I've always been interested in. Just, for me, I think I'm still kind of understanding what even, my message might be, right?
Yeah.
I think that I have, evolved and grown so much. And every time that I think I know what I would talk about, I'm reminded that maybe I'd be talking about something different again. You know what I mean? So,
And that's typical. Like,
yeah.
I'll tell you, having worked with a lot of TED speakers, they all come in with a very similar sort of, look, I know I want to do a TED talk, but what do I talk about? Or I've been asked to do a TED talk. Oh my God, what am I going to talk about?
Yeah.
So, it's pretty common.
Well, and I think this too. I think that from the experience that I've had working with some speaking coaches and things as well is, when you go to tell a story, and there's so many, that's the hard thing, right? Is when I did it, they had you say just, hey, start kind of your overall kind of who you are, right? Kind of go through this, then kind of go back through and start to pick out those key moments. But I think as someone that gets into it, we think everything's kind of a key moment, right? There's all it's hard to remove certain things because it's like we have a lot of identity, I think, tied into these little things that we want people to know. And so much about speaking is that, when you're getting into it, you want to tell people your credibility versus allowing the story to tell them that credibility, right? Like, it's not about you getting them to see you, it's you getting them to see themselves through you.
Yeah. And I think you're getting at here, and this is something that I deal with all the time, is that especially with people who want to be on a TED stage, because we all listen to TED Talks. And, what's so compelling about a good TED Talk is we listen to it and it feels like that person is talking directly to us, telling a story. And so we have this perception as people who want to do a TED Talk that a TED Talk is a story. And you're not wrong, but you're not fully right. You see, here's the thing. It's not the story, it's the idea. And the idea is hidden inside of that story. And this is the hard part, because when you are thinking about what it is you want to tell people, of course, our brain goes to, well, what's the story I'm going to tell? Well, the answer to that is, what's the idea you want to convey? And so we have to start with idea first. And so one of the things, and this was, I think, probably one of the things that differentiated me when I started as a TED speakers coach, was that I never went to the story first, because I was trained, as I said, as a researcher. So for me, it was like, well, what's the underpinning? What's the thing that you want to get out there in the world? And so identifying that idea first. And what I've learned and I've become really good at is defining an idea. Most people don't know how to define their idea. In fact, what often happens is somebody goes, I have a great idea, let me tell you about it. And a half an hour later, we're still listening. And we're like, where's that idea you told me about, right?
Yeah.
And so what I've done is I've found a way, and I did this in the early days of TED, was to define an idea in one sentence. And when you're able to do that, now that's a very packed sentence. Don't get me wrong. It holds a lot of information, but the reality is when you can do that, it becomes the center point, the North Star for your talk. And then finding the story that can hold that idea is way easier. So to your point where you're like, well, where do I start? Where do I go? Because our lives are long, our experiences are deep and vast. And so where do you go? How do you find that starting point? Well, you start with, what is the idea? So when I know what my idea is, then I can go, when in my life have I experienced something similar to that? Like, what is it? Because all ideas have a change or an issue or an opportunity, right? That's kind of the key to an idea, is there's, a conflict, a concept, an idea, a change. And so when we look at that, okay, well, those lend themselves to what we call in the story world of tropes. And there's nothing wrong with a trope. A trope is great because what it is it's a learning tool. It's like a metaphor, right? So when you identify your idea and then you go, okay, what's hidden inside of that? Is that a transformation? Is that a revelation? Is that a learning from the future? Like, what is it? What can we pull out of it? What archetype is hidden inside of that story? Now, where in my life have I experienced that archetype, or where in my career, or where in my business? And so then we find a place. And then what we do is we very deliberately build the story around the idea, because it acts as the context. As I said, that idea is tightly packed. It's one sentence. So the story helps to do two things. One, it contextualizes it so that when you hear that idea said out loud, it's like, oh, I get it, because that story equals that idea. But the second thing it does is it starts to unpack the pieces of that story. And it gives you, in many ways, I always like to call it a breadcrumb trail to follow for the rest of your presentation. Because if you open with a story that leads to an idea, now you've given yourself, if you've been smart about it, you've given yourself a whole bunch of places to go back to in that story to keep the story going. So to the listener, the entire presentation, and it could be a boardroom presentation, feels like a story. But to you, you're now unpacking a very tightly wound idea, and you're giving it to them in bite-sized chunks so they remember it.
Wow, that's amazing. No, I love that. When there's probably a lot of listeners on here that want to, that are interested in getting into speaking, right? And public
of course.
What is the, what do you think is one of the things that really, and obviously TED Talks is one spectrum of it, but just, in general with people that, like you said, maybe it's a boardroom, maybe it's leading their team, maybe it's having conversations, like they want to do it, but they're nervous, they're scared, they're going to get up there and forget everything, right? I know that when I first started doing it, I would write every single thing out and then try to go back and remember everything I wrote out or chunk it down. I mean, what do you see a lot of things that holds people up from really, starting to tell these stories or getting more into this kind of speaking?
There's so many things, and you've just hit on a couple of them. Number one is like, how am I going to remember all this stuff? That's a lot, The second thing is, am I the right person to do this? Another one is like, I can't tell a story in a corporate setting. That's just, or in a scientific setting, or, story is one of those things that, we get trained out of us early on. Like, it's just the facts, man, just the facts, right? No one wants any of that, rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is we're hardwired for story. That is the way we as humans communicate the best. And not only the best, but communicate in general. Just even listening to our language, we use metaphors so easily and fluidly in our language, but yet we don't even realize it. So those are like some of the top ones, but an imposter syndrome is real. So many people show up thinking, well, someone else is always so much better than me. Or another piece, I get into mindset a lot when I'm working with people who want to step into that role as what I call a thought leader. And, what I see is that, when we are in that place of beginning our journey towards thought leadership, we really are in two places. One, we've got our knowledge, our expertise. What is it we know? And how confident are we in that thing that we know, that only we know? Because here's the thing, like 1,000 people could be doing the same thing you're doing, but your thing differently than anyone else because of who you are, the experience you've had, the cultural background you've experienced, the education you've chosen, or maybe the education you didn't choose, the things that you've done. All of those things contribute to your knowledge set. The second thing is the influence that you exert with the audience you're in front of. And your influence is one of those things that a lot of people don't even believe they have. But here's the thing. If you're being asked to be in front of the room or on a stage or even on a podcast, you have influence. And so how confident are you in that influence, and how comfortable are you in leaning into it? Because influence is really about emotions, right? So we've got confidence in knowledge and the ability to connect emotionally. Those are the two pieces that sort of trip people up. And they tend to kind of fall into a couple of different categories. The first one is, those who are highly confident in the knowledge they have, so confident, in fact, they would call themselves an expert. But because they call themselves an expert, the challenge is that they don't want to be seen as anything but. So leaning into emotions feels like a crutch to them. Like, oh, I can't do that. That would be unethical. That would be showing a weakness, right? But that's not true, because here's the thing. We as the audience, when they're telling us all of, and we've all sat in the audience with experts, right? Whether it be, again, in a boardroom or in a large audience, where they're spewing data and facts and, research studies. And you're like, oh my God, this person is so smart. But I don't remember a thing they said. And I feel intimidated by them, right? So I don't connect to them. Then on the other side, you get people who lean heavily into their influence. Now, this is an interesting thing, because what I see is that people who are experts are often also on this other side. They flip-flop back and forth. And again, I want to just make it clear, I'm talking about mindset, not reality, okay? So these are mindsets that we take. So you've got the expert mindset, or maybe you're on the other side of the spectrum, where I call them change makers. And these are people who are really passionate about what they do. They come to it with lots of heart. They are telling us about the impact and what will happen. And they've got stories, and they've got lots and lots and lots of information that is all held inside of a lot of very passionate information. But they don't go into the facts. It's a lot of it feels like conjecture. And so what happens as the audience, we feel like they're trying to convince us. We feel like there's a whole lot of like nothing going on there. Like, oh my God, I mean, I love how passionate they are, but is any of this true?
Yeah.
Right. And so we go, I need some of the facts. And like I said, what I often see is that people flip-flop between this. Like, we get the experts that turn into change makers, that turn back into experts, and it goes back and forth. And then the third category that I see are what we call connectors. And those are people who are literally in imposter syndrome, where, they get the opportunities and they go, Michael, you know what? You're so much better at this than me. Why don't I do all the work? And I'm going to hand it to you, and you go ahead and stand at the front of the stage, right?
Yeah.
And the problem with that, of course, is that we never get that person's true impact, because they are so afraid of showing up and using their voice that we get denied the knowledge that only they have. And so those are sort of the pieces. And you can see there's hidden inside of that a lot of different reasons why people don't show up, or the stories they tell themselves when they do show up, because that's all it is. It's just stories.
It is. And I mean, there's so much in there, right? That's incredible. I know that for myself, as I started to get into it, and I would say, honestly, for me, the more I started to, you ever heard of Bo Eason?
No.
So Bo Eason, that's who I went to. He was this public speaking coach that I worked with. And, I went out to California, and we had an event out there that I was with him. And, we were 2 days in, and the exercise they had us do was, everyone stand up, everyone walk up on the stage. And there's 30 people at this event, right? And they say, pick your favorite animal. Yeah. Act like it, right? And start to, I mean, there's executives, we're crawling on stage on our hands and knees. And, it was, for me, I honestly believe that it was one of the most transformational, like, getting into public speaking was an internal transformation for me, because there were so many fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of all of these things that people say about you when you get up there, and how you feel when you're getting, like, all those nerves, right? He had us get up there and start doing this, and I'm growling at guys and all of this, and I had never felt so free. Yeah. The weight that came off of me when I felt, even when I came back and, like, talked to my people and my team, it was like, Mike, you're glowing. There's something different about you. It's like, because so much of it was just all of these, again, the judgments, the things that we tell ourselves all of these stories before we, get up there and speak. And, one of their reasons was, one, to do that, obviously, to get you out of your comfort zone, right? The other side of it is that, as humans, we use vocabulary so much in our communication, right? And you look at other mammals, right? And the physicality that they have, and the way that they, use their body, and the way they present themselves, and the way they hold themselves, right? Like, you don't realize as a human how closed off we are, and how much we have this amazing vessel that has been given to us as this instrument to be able to communicate with, right? And we're so scared to use it.
It's so true. I mean, and that's exactly what I was going to say. It was about really learning that you are not just a floating head up there on stage. You've got a body that you get to actually use. And this is something that is so powerful for most communicators, most speakers to really for it to drop, like I like to say, drop from head to heart, right? Because what happens is when we start to understand that our body, like when we look at the performance skills, like, we agonize over the words we're going to say, right? Like, as you know, when we're working on a talk with, like when I'm working with a speaker on a talk, like we're agonizing, like, and we're not necessarily writing a script, but we're trying to get the narrative down. We're trying to make sure that the messages are correct and what are the stories and all of that. But the reality is 60 to 70% of what the audience takes away comes from how you look and how you sound. And what I mean by that is your physicality on stage and the way in which you use your voice. Those are the things that we in the audience are connecting to. Now, that's not to say that the content isn't important. It is, because here's the thing. If you only focus on those things, and you got crap that you're putting out there, that's what your audience is going to remember about you. So it is about having the right words or having the right message, of course. But when you learn to embody your message, because that's what we're really talking about. And, one of the things that I always do with my clients is, I don't even get into delivery until we've got the words down, because let's first of all make sure. But then it is exactly what you just described. It's like, okay, stand up. Let's get those words not living in your head, but living in your body. Mm-hmm. How are you embodying that message? Where does it live in your body? One of the things that we like to do, there's a great exercise. So it's similar to the animal one, but we do one. It's where we get speakers to stand up and start to do the opening lines of their talk. And then we say, okay, now do your talk like a Shakespearean actor. Mm. Now do your talk like a country music singer. Now do your talk like a rock and roll, or whatever. And we give them a whole bunch of archetypes. Mm. And to your point, like suddenly you see the range that you've got access to. Yeah. And it forces you, because if I'm going to be a Shakespearean actor, I'm in a whole different place than if I'm a country and music star, than if I'm a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
Right. And you move them through these emotional and physical places so that they start to see what they have access to. And for me, as their coach, I can also see where they're not yet embodying, because as soon as we start moving through these different places, I can observe them. I can observe their body. I can hear their voice. And for me, it's one of the most interesting things is listening to how something sounds when somebody is believing themselves versus when somebody isn't believing themselves. Because you can hear it. And, it's usually where I'm listening to them, I'm like, wait a minute, we got to go back to your content. You don't believe yourself. Your audience isn't going to believe you. So let's go back. What is it you're saying right now that you don't believe? Let's rework it. And you see it in their whole body. Because that's why when we're watching somebody, especially a good TED speaker, and we feel like they're talking to us, why? Because not only do they believe every word they're saying, they've learned how to embody that message in such a way that it feels like they are just having a conversation with us off the cuff.
That's good. Yeah. And one of my qualities is, and I'm a pretty big guy, not a little bit above average. Right. And so, but one of the things that my coach was stressed with me was, he says that when you walk, you shrink yourself to rooms. He's like, you see, he's like, and you can see it in your voice and in your presentation. Yeah. You're all like, you will shrink down. He said, well, he had me do was practicing outside. Right. He's like, go outside and speak loud and be big and get used to practicing and expanding yourself versus practicing it within the four walls. Because, for so many people, especially a big guys, like, when you get up there and you start to shrink yourself down and you're not, using the room and really being able to, expand yourself, people will lose interest in that too, because it doesn't feel in alignment, or they feel like you're not really getting the message to them that your body should be delivering.
That's it. And, this is something, the acting term for that is status. Status it has nothing to do with socioeconomic. It is about the how you embody who you are and how you show up. And status is really comprised of three things. I like to think of it as a triangle. And it starts with my perception of myself. So we can agree that I'm 100% in control of my perception of me, right? And so I always can decide what I think of myself. And if I have done the work like you have, and you're sort of showing up going, yeah, I'm pretty happy with who I am. And I think I've got something of service. And I think that I'm pretty good at this. One of my coaches always uses that, like, do you have something that you can offer that will be of service? Yes, you do. Are you pretty good at this? Yes, you are. Okay, so we can agree that that's true. The second part of status is the piece that most people don't look at. And it's kind of a little bit of a hard one to wrap your head around. And that is my perception of how you perceive me. That's the piece that trips us up every time. Because, as you describe sort of shrinking yourself to the room, part of what you're doing is you're like, ooh, I can't be as loud as I need to be. I can't be as big as I need to be. I'm in there's some perception you had or were holding that you were in some way going to overwhelm the audience or overwhelm the speakers or whatever it was. Didn't really matter. There was something going on where you were in conflict. My perception of me. So your perception of you and your perception of how the audience was perceiving you were in conflict with each other. And what happens is the audience doesn't know what's going on in your head, but what they do know is they start to feel that there's a conflict going on. And they, this is where the audience would be like, I don't know what it is. Like, I really liked him, but there's just something about him. I can't put my finger on it. Right.
Yeah.
And because that's what you're projecting, because the third piece of that triangle is how the audience actually perceives you. But like any triangle, if you are in control of two sides or two of those angles, the third one gets filled in for you. So you are in control of two of them. You're in control of how you perceive yourself. You're in control of how you perceive that someone else perceives you. And so you actually are in control of how they perceive you. So when you know that, so the idea of you going and practicing outdoors was you learning to just fully embody and accept the bigness of who you are. So when you walked on that stage, you were like a big welcoming bear on the stage for people. And they're like, oh my God, I love him.
Yeah.
Because you had accepted that was actually good. You'd heard yourself in all of who you are. And it's powerful, right? And when we start to decode this and start to understand it, it's helpful. It's just helpful to know those things.
Yeah. And I love it because you hear public speaking or the TED Talks, and we think, I think we can almost put it in a box.
Yeah.
Right. Where we like, oh, it's public speaking. It's like, I don't think, and it's just like anything, right? As you grow a business and you develop, you become someone different in that process as well. Right. And I think so much with the public speaking side is that when they hear or people hear public speaking, like they just think going up on a stage and talking. Right. They don't realize the transformation of the individual to be able to get on that stage to do that. Right. There's a lot in there that I think is very overlooked.
And I think you're 100% right. Like I said, I think that's part of the reason why when I started this business, Talk Boutique, and got into sort of the TED world, people would always say, oh, you're in public speaking. And yes, I was. I even have a speakers bureau. So yes, I guess I am in public speaking. But the reality for me was that it was actually more about thought leadership, because what I started to see was that it was less about where you were speaking and more about the messages you were conveying and how you were conveying them, because those messages are so important for our world. And so if we kind of bring it down to this little box of public speaking and we go, it's just a thing I do. I get up on stage and I talk to people about things. Well, actually, there are some people who do that. And, there's lots of motivational speakers out there. And, that's important. Don't get me wrong. But I think the best speakers, the ones that we align with the most, are the ones who are so authentic about what they're doing and why they're doing it. They're the ones that change us.
Yeah.
And they change us because they've changed themselves through their own process. They've discovered who they are. And with that, we discover who we are. And so
Mm,
that to me is thought leadership. That's
yeah.
not public speaking. Public speaking is the thing they're doing. What they're conveying
Yeah.
is a transformation of self. And that's thought leadership.
That's good. This is good. Andrea, I appreciate you. I mean, coming in today and sharing all this has been amazing. Let me ask you for obviously you have your the business and the speaking and all the coaching and all that as well. And, there's probably people that are, interested in taking that step. But there's also the people that are kind of, just want to, maybe not jump into getting coached yet. Right. And they want to maybe
Yeah.
take those incremental steps. Right. What are some maybe ideas or some things that you could share to maybe help someone before they, make the jump and commit all in? But like, what can people do to start to improve themselves a little bit in this area?
Well, first of all, we've got some great tools, and I'm happy to offer them to your listeners. We've got something called the Storytelling Toolkit, which has our three main frameworks. So the idea framework, the story spine, and the talk canvas. And these are the tools that we use with all of our clients. And happy to give your listeners that as a free download, because I really, truly do believe that, look, I'm a speaker's coach. Come hire me. Love it. But I don't think not everyone needs to. And so go and tell your stories, learn how to tell your stories, learn how to structure your ideas. Listen to, I've got a YouTube channel called the Thought Leader Academy, which I do a lot of free resources and also do, I'll tell you how to use a lot of these tools. So go and watch some of that, because the thing is, like, it's important that we all learn to use our voice and to tell our stories that hold our ideas. And so if you're just getting started, the first thing is think about, what is your story and what is the idea that lives inside of that story? Sometimes it's easier to find the story first and then back the idea out of it. Other times it might be easier for you to start with that idea. Now, either way, you need to identify the idea first, but how you get there, it will be determined by who you are and where you are in that. But find that idea, and that idea is really something that you uniquely do, and you do it in a specific area or topic. I always say it's a what, a how, and a why. The what is your topic. What's the thing that you're that you are really enamored with, or that you live for? And millions of people can have that same topic.
Yeah.
But your next piece, the how, that's you. That's what you bring to that topic. That's how you activate it uniquely. And the what and the how together are the uniqueness of your idea. But it's not quite finished there, because you see, it's not just your idea. It's an idea that's changing others. And so the why is the outcome, the impact that your idea has. So when you put your what, your how, and your why together, your topic, your point, and your impact, now what you have is a well-structured idea, and an idea that will likely light you up. And so start there, and then find the story that holds it.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. Well, Andrea, I appreciate you coming on today. It was great to have you and great to connect with you. I'll make sure that I put all the, in the show notes as well. We'll have everything in there for you, so everybody can, locate that and find it. What's the best way to, contact you or reach out to you, or potentially even work with you? How can they find you?
Sure. Go to our website, talkboutique.com. Sign up for our newsletter. It's great. You can, and it comes from me. You can directly contact me there. Also follow me on LinkedIn. I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. And of course, like I said, check out our my Instagram, but also our YouTube channel, The Thought Leader Academy. I'm active across all of them.
You're busy.
I'm busy. I am.
Well, Andrea, it was amazing to have you on here today. I appreciate you so much, and I look forward to continuing to watch you grow and do everything that you're doing. And I'm excited to get more into it myself. Right, this kind of sparked a little bit back in me. I feel like I've kind of not been as intentional with my public speaking or focused on it, and so just this conversation today has kind of got me, I'd say, fired up to kind of get back into it again. So I appreciate you for that.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Michael. And I'm excited to see what you create coming out of this.
Hey, you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
You too. Take care. Bye now.